I'll ask you the same thing in closing. The Biden administration had listening sessions actually inside the White House with younger workers who had real concerns about Israel and Gaza. I'm wondering, what does the Biden administration need to do to get the progressive base energized, since that's where the real ground game comes from in November?
It's a very tricky problem. First of all, I think President Biden is conducting his foreign policy on foreign policy grounds. He's not conducting his Israel policy as an election issue. I think he actually cares about the issue and is trying to do what he thinks is best, whether it's right or wrong. Second of all, but analyzing it politically, he's in a vice, because to the extent he moves closer to what the base wants, he moves further from what the center wants. So he really is facing demands to move further from the center of public opinion on political grounds. So I'm not really sure there is a political solution for him, except to the extent that he can actually put this war to rest and get it out of the headlines and get it, out of people's heads and get them focusing more on issues where I think he has a more solid chance of unifying his coalition.
All right, New York Magazine's Jonathan Chait, thank you very much for your insight.
So you see there with a guy, at least, and the reason why I wanted to play that, because at least he's being honest. Like, this guy is in a vice. There's really not nothing he could do here, because one leaning in one way eliminates party or coalition, and leaning the other way. I wonder if he went all in on Palestine, though. Do you really think the Zionists would leave the Democratic Party? And how much would that affect the Democratic Party? I never hear them saying Zionists are part of their coalition. I always hear them saying young people. I always hear them saying black people. I never hear them saying Zionists. So you have to prove to me, I guess, that he would lose part of his base, or enough of his base, or enough of his coalition, let's put it that way, if he were to go all in on Palestine. You have to prove that to me. That hasn't been proven to me yet. But let's break down the video now. Again, I'm playing the videos all the way through first, so you get a chance to watch, and then we break down.
I'll ask you the same thing in closing. The Biden administration had listening sessions actually inside the White House with younger workers who had real concerns about Israel and Gaza. I'm wondering, what does Joe Biden,
So they had a listening session with, I guess, staffers, workers about this, meaning they weren't in the room. They're just listening to them talk about the issue. So Joe Biden can't say he does not know exactly the policy positions of young voters. He also knows he's not going to fulfill at all any of those policy wants from young voters and left-leaning voters. He also knows that. There is not going to be any policy beliefs. There just has to be framing. There just has to be a different way to trick the workers. This is why they always say it has to be a different message. It has to be a different message. You never hear them say there has to be a different policy. There needs to be a policy shift. They never say that, because it's never about changing what they've already made a calculation that they're going to go for. It's about confusing you. That's what it's always about. Let's continue.
What does the Biden administration need to do to get the progressive base energized, since that's where the real ground game comes from in November?
You can't. You cannot. And the fact that Netanyahu and the state of Israel has said, hey, buddy, United States, this war is not ending anytime soon. So you're seeing in more current news, you're seeing a big to-do being made about this two-state solution, because Netanyahu came out and said, We don't want to do two-state solution, and stop asking me about it. So he finally publicly came out and said the two-state solution is off the table. So now Joe Biden has been given a green light. You see how this is a dance? Netanyahu's playing the same dance. Netanyahu understands that the policy position that he's taking publicly plays well in Israel. So it's a win-win for both of them. They go to the back, they make this deal with cigars. Hey, buddy, let's do this. We're going to go out and let's make sure you give a good acting job in that thing. And let's make sure to present to us, the public, like there's a rift. Answer this question. If you have a rift with somebody, do you sneak around? Do you sneak around accountability to get that person some more money and weapons? Is that what you do? Or is that what you do when you're in lockstep with genocide Israel and you're just projecting in the public that you're not? Let's continue. May have belabored the point.
It's a very tricky problem. First of all, I think
now anytime a pundit comes on and he asks a question and the person doesn't answer the question in affirmative, that means it's a no. There's nothing he can do. You see how he said it's a very tricky. That means it's nothing he can do. Let's let him finish.
President Biden is conducting his foreign policy on foreign policy grounds. He's not conducting his Israel policy as an election issue. I think he actually cares about the issue and is trying to do what he thinks is best, whether it's right or wrong. Second of all, but
this is something they always try to do. As you're committing a genocide, you want to say to me, he believes he's on the right side. He believes he's doing the right thing, right or wrong. Not good enough, sir.
But
you understand, they say that as to be some sort of honorable thing. He's not doing this out of malice. It's not genocide out of malice.
Analyzing it politically, he's in a vice, because to the extent he moves closer to what the base wants, he moves further from what the center wants. So he really is facing demands to move further from the center of public opinion on political grounds. So I'm not really sure there is a political solution for him, except to the extent that he can actually put this war to rest.
And pretending that there's a public feud with Netanyahu is that putting to rest. Because they've already asked him to bring this to a close so that they can move this out of the news cycle. This story of Israel in occupied Palestine committing a genocide needs to get out of the news cycle. As long as it remains in a news cycle, Joe Biden is going to remain under 35% in the approval rating, just based off of young voters and people of color. They need to move this out of the news cycle, but the best next thing, if it's going to stay in a news cycle, it needs to be the news cycle of I'm fighting against Netanyahu and this genocide.
And get it out of the headlines and get it, out of people's heads and get them focusing more on issues where I think he has a more solid chance of unifying his coalition.
All right, New York Magazine's Jonathan Chait, thank you very much for your insight.
Let's get to shoot. The next thing I want to get to is student loan forgiveness, because where did I have it on? I think I had it on Inside. Was it Inside Politics? Let me see if it was Inside Politics. Anyway, I'm trying to remember, because this particular part I want to show you on student loan is not not Inside Edition, Inside Politics. Is not a clip. It is from TV. They're probably not going to clip this, or if they have, I haven't seen it yet. But it speaks about student loan forgiveness and how Joe Biden has just set up another round of student loan forgiveness. But the segment is about, is this going to be enough for young voters? And they're being very honest about how this is literally, he's doing this to try to get young voters. Here we go.
Announced another round of student loan forgiveness today. The action will forgive $5 billion in student loans for 74,000 borrowers. That brings total student debt forgiveness under the Biden administration to over $137 billion for more than 3.7 million borrowers. I want to get back to our panel to discuss this and other information regarding the Biden reelection effort. MJ Lee joins the panel now. MJ, we're going to get to your new reporting in 1 second, but let's just stay on this announcement from the Biden administration and just talk for a second about how it plays into the very important yet very fragile coalition that he needs to keep intact in order to win re-election. And one of the questions is about on student loans and young people and getting them excited. And because it's been there have been lots of hurdles, let's say, in getting the student loan forgiveness promise actually to the finish line, I want to listen to some voters in Nevada. They're swing voters, and this is part of what they were talking about. They are Trump to Biden voters from back in 2020.
At first, I heard him say a lot of things that he was going to be doing, and even with the student loans and stuff. And he has somewhat, but it hasn't, for a lot of people, his promises have not come forth.
He's definitely made improvements to student loans. I know not as much as some people feel, but there definitely have been people who have gotten their student loan debt erased.
Biden really agonized over this decision initially for student loan forgiveness. I reported at the time that his top aides were presenting data that said, look, on one hand, we don't want to alienate sort of the working class. And, you've framed yourself as Amtrak Joe and protecting sort of the sanctity of labor. But on the other hand, former chief of staff Frank Lane was saying, look, this could really galvanize young voters here. It was also policy-wise meant to be a part of sort of a racial equity agenda as well, and aimed at galvanizing Black voters, voters of color as well here. And now sort of the challenge is you had that really sprawling announcement of student loan forgiveness, which obviously hit roadblocks in the courts. And now you kind of have a piecemeal approach of trying to forgive loan here and there. But you raised expectations so much amongst the voting blocks that I just described. Will these announcements really please those voters? And
that's the question right there. And when he made the announcement of student loan forgiveness, everybody was on that. I remember Bree was doing segments on that, 2 or 3 every single week on the Hill. We were covering some of them. Student loan forgiveness was a hot topic. Right around, was it November, September, right before the midterms. I don't want to give a date. Right before the midterms. And it fell apart soon thereafter because it was designed to fall apart because he never wanted to have to forgive it. He then later signed a deal as part of one of either the debt ceiling or extending the debt ceiling or something like that. As part of that deal, he also agreed never to pause the student loan. So he can't pause it. And the court already said he couldn't forgive it under the clause that he was trying to forgive it. So now he's having to do this piecemeal thing that is literally not getting the same effect as the bigger everything together. And understand this little bit of forgiveness. Let me put the number up here. 137 billion in loan forgiveness. Now I think I know one person, Colin from Indie News that's the only person who I personally have heard and said, hey, I've gotten this money forgiven. Student loan forgiveness. Let's see what was promised. Biden promised. Let's see what was promised though, because it was that 2020 when he promised that? I think it was 2020 when he promised that. All right, so let's look at this. I do have one here. Let me go to this NPR article. Let's go to this NPR article here, just to look at it. This headline. Right. Yeah. Biden pledged to forgive $10,000 in student loan debt. Now, this is after he didn't fulfill the original agreement. Because now they're saying this is NPR. They're not telling the full story. It says on the trail, Biden had pledged to cancel at least $10,000 of student debt per person. And this is March 2020. That they're making, showing you the tweets. Biden has focused on pre-existing forgiveness programs. They go into, again, this is before he actually put forth the forgiveness. I just wanted to show you the headline, $10,000 student loan debt per student. I remember $50,000, and I remember an amount for HSBUs, historically Black colleges, that he never did. So just understand, 137 billion still is not close to being enough, or at least to what he had promised originally. I don't mean the updated promises. I mean the original promises. But let's finish this part.
Forgiveness under the Biden administration.
Actually, let me fast forward back to where I was here. This guy speaking. Right here.
As Amtrak Joe and protecting sort of the sanctity of labor. But on the other hand, former Chief of Staff Ron Klain was saying, look, this could really galvanize young voters here. It was also policy-wise meant to be a part of sort of a racial equity agenda as well, and aimed at
the
galvanizing
HSBUs.
Black voters, voters of color as well here. And now sort of the challenge is you had that really sprawling announcement of student loan forgiveness, which obviously hit roadblocks in the courts. And now you kind of have a piecemeal approach of trying to forgive loan here and there. But you raised expectations so much amongst the voting blocs that I just described. Will these announcements really please those voters and excite them in the same way that that initial announcement would?
Yeah, that's such a good point. Casey, before we get to MJ's reporting, I want to just put one more bit of this focus group from Richard Thaw, which is always great to have. This specifically is on the economy and how people are feeling about it.
Rentals have gone up. Senior housing has gone up. People who have to sell their house or want to sell or want to be relocated cannot do it right now unless they take a loss. It hits every way of life, not just grocery stores, but all these other major expenses that people have.
I feel the real problem is that we don't get to see things on the bottom line of it all. Like when we go to the grocery stores, when we go to the gas pumps, we're not seeing those. The savings aren't coming over to us.
I got a text with a story for the Wall Street Journal today from somebody in Biden world saying that voters are starting to feel the economy. I mean, this is really.
I got that same text.
Did you really?
Yeah.
They're having a real problem trying to sell Bidenomics because it's a joke. But the point has already been made about the student loan forgiveness. So the question I present to people, progressives, young people, is forgiving your student loan debt, is that a good exchange for your vote? Because to me, for your vote for 2024. Now, it's a good exchange for your vote in 2020. So if you voted for Biden and now you're receiving student loan payments, understand you don't owe a future vote. He is paying you what he owes you from your last vote, the last time you supported him. This money that you're giving, this 137, that's for 2020. I'm sorry, that's for 2020. I said 2020. That's for 2020. Okay, let's get to the next part here. So we covered the student loan forgiveness, and now let's cover this other part. It's another part of the Morning Joe. Okay, here we go. Now I can see where I'm at. So let's go back to Twitter. And there's one other Morning Joe clip, and I think it's also from the same episode. So they were on fire talking about nonsense on this episode. But let's look at it here. Morning Joe clip. Okay, so I know which one. I had to look at my notes to see which one it was. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? That one. Is it this one? Bear with me 1 second, everybody. Oh, that's the Palestinian video. Oh, you guys are right here watching it with me. I forgot you have the screen on. I'm trying to remember. Oh, right here. Honest with the workers. Okay, yeah. My bad, everybody. Here we go with some of the content that I wanted to show you now. Is there honest with workers? I'm missing one video. One video I'm missing. This one. Morning Joe. Biting in the vase. One second, everybody. I misplaced one video. We're gonna play that too, Mark Lamont. So what I'll do is just go to case study QB. Maybe misplaced it somewhere. Let's go to case studies page and just get the video directly. Now, who I'm looking for is a particular guest he had on the show, and when I show you the video, here it goes right here. It's the first video. Oh, actually, it wasn't on my account. It was on the RBN account, and I missed it. So this is what I was looking for. I thought I had tweeted it out, but I tweeted it out from the main account. All right, here is the video, and we shall play it and listen. I think it's self-explanatory.
Why is it the left, progressives, whatever they're calling themselves these days, they've forgotten the story that was right in the palm of their hand? And the story is they should ask themselves perhaps.
Actually, let me preface this particular clip a little bit better. So when we're talking about supporting a Democratic Party, we're talking about workers. That's the phrasing I use when we're talking about all of this is workers versus owners. The reason I say the Democratic Party is not the party for workers is because they explicitly say things that say that they're not a party of workers. And I'm going to show this video along with another video from Michael Brooks and Vivek Chabar, where they talk about this topic of the Democratic Party and the American left actually being representatives for workers, and are they good representatives? So let's examine or let's listen to this video and hear him talk about. He has asked a question. The guy you see on the screen, he has asked a question. His name is Anand Gurharadas. He's asked a question. Why isn't the left? So what they do is they bring on these pseudo left people and they bring them on to represent the left point of view, and then they ask him these questions. So they're asking him, why isn't the left fallen in line because of all of the historical things that the Democratic Party has delivered. In other words, based on all the historical things that the Democrats has done, the left should automatically be falling in line for the Democratic Party. That's essentially what the question is, but let's listen to the whole clip.
Why is it the left, progressives, whatever they're calling themselves these days, they've forgotten the story that was right in the palm of their hand? And the story is they should ask themselves perhaps these questions, some of these questions. Who built your party? Who formed the spine of your party? Who fought for your country? Who comes down the street to put out your fires? Who comes down the street to protect your house and your children from vandals, from hoodlums? Who did this? Who built the foundation for the house and the country that you live in?
Slaves?
They've forgotten those people.
You talking about slaves?
Those people are the core of a movement that lasted for 50 years, that formed the New Deal, that created Social Security, workmen's compensation, the GI Bill, all the things that built the middle class. And the progressives today, no time for them.
Well, I think the Democratic Party, and this has happened in the UK, in a lot of places around the world, center-left parties used to be labor parties, whether in name or in fact. That was the galvanizing force. That was the organizing force. That was the force multiplication in the field, labor unions. And then labor unions were decimated by the ascendancy of the Reaganite right, and membership tanked. And so a giant kind of strike force in politics that did that work is gone. And in that vacuum, center-left parties, including the Democratic Party, became much more and more academia-adjacent parties, dominated by debates over terminology. Some of these debates are very, very important. Don't get me wrong.
We're having a bigger debate about the Harvard presidency than we are about middle-class people.
Right. That's the kind, right? It's not about who's right in that Harvard debate. It's just like, why are we even talking about Harvard? It's the wrong conversation, right? And we're not talking about making factories safer for people who work there. And so one of the things that the Inc. we're doing this year is trying to step back and look at these bigger questions of why we are in a situation where American autocracy is even possible. And I think one of the things we've looked at in this interview with Ruth Ben-Ghiat I had yesterday and Daniel Ziblatt last week is, does the Democratic Party need to recenter itself as a union-based party, particularly in a moment when there's a labor resurgence and real victories happening there, and be less of an academia adjacent party, less interested in these tedious hair-splitting debates and more rooted in worker movements?
Okay, so it's good and bad. He again, these pseudo-left people have a very good way of getting it right up until a certain point, you know what I mean? And then getting the rest of it wrong. But I let it all play. That's what we're trying to do now. Let it play all the way through. Then we go back and break it down. So let's break it down.
Why is it the left, progressives, whatever they're calling themselves these days, they've forgotten the story that was right in the palm of their hand? And the story is they should ask themselves perhaps these questions, some of these questions. Who built your party? Who formed the spine of your party? Who fought for your country? Who comes down the street to put out your fires? Who comes down the street to protect your house and your children from vandals, from hoodlums? Who did this? Who built the foundation for the house and the country that you live in? They've forgotten those people. Those people are the core of a movement that lasted for 50 years, that formed the New Deal, that created Social Security, workmen's compensation, the GI Bill, all the things that built the middle class. And the progressives today, no time for them.
Well, I think the Democratic Party, and this has happened in the UK, in a lot of places around the world, center-left parties used to be labor parties, whether in name or in fact. That was the galvanizing force. That was the organizing force. That was the force multiplication in the field, labor unions. And then labor unions were decimated by the ascendancy of the Reaganite.
Yes. Then they start tearing down unions. Like it was a real PR battle. I remember it was the late 80s. I was a kid, so late 80s, early mid 80s, something like that. It was just a lot of rhetoric I remember hearing in the news. Unions are bad, unions this, unions that. So it was a real attack on it. And we all know about Bill Clinton leaving behind the working class, leaving behind unions in order to make a deal with suburban white moms. So
right, and membership tanked, and so a giant kind of strike force in politics that did that work is gone. And in that vacuum, center-left parties, including the Democratic Party, became much more and more academia-adjacent parties.
Right. Academia-adjacent parties.
So socialism basically can be thought of as saying, we want to take the promise that liberals made, that Kant made, and that Hegel made, and we want to make it real. Now, the liberalism that you talk about, Michael, when you say there's a lot of liberalism within the left today, I would not call it that. So the identitarian stuff that you talk about, the narrowness, that is not an ideological hangover of liberalism. That is a very, very active set of people pushing their material interests. Right. The left in the United States is fundamentally and overwhelmingly a middle class formation. It is not it's the first left globally, historically, that has no connection to the working, to the poor at all.
Overwhelmingly a middle class formation and has no connection to the working class at all. This is what the guy in the Morning Joe clip, the MSNBC clip, is referring to when he says that the left or the Democratic Party is largely academia, is largely middle class, and without a connection to the working class. And that's what he was saying in that Morning Joe video, is that the Democratic Party has to go back to being a party of the unions. But let's let Vivek, and that's who this is. Vivek is on the right. Michael Brooks is on the left. Let's let him finish out this point. I rewind it a little bit and then let him finish out the point.
The left in the United States is fundamentally and overwhelmingly a middle class formation. It is not it's the first left globally, historically, that has no connection to the working, to the poor at all. People.
Okay, I had to pause it there because it has no connection whatsoever to the working class. Think about that, everybody in the audience. Think about that. No connection. There's a left that has defined itself as the left without any connection to the working class. This is why you can be called a leftist, which, Medicare for all, $15 minimum wage. Give me my Malcolm X stamp, please. It is specifically for this reason. It's like a redefinition of the left that excludes imperialism, that excludes war, that excludes all of these things. This is why you can be nuanced on war. Anti-war? Yes. And I'm down with sending $100 billion to Ukraine, and I'm called anti-war. Like, it's that sort of thing because there's no connection to the working class, to the poor. Let me finish this out, and then we can kind of finish.
People complain that the left is white. Bullshit. That's a second. The left has those non-whites who are in the American left are all middle class too. It's disproportionately white, but it's all middle class.
Now listen to this part coming up.
In that setting, when you're only bringing in middle class people into your organization, a big chunk of them are going to say, we don't want to hear about poverty. We don't want to hear about the economy. What we want to know is, when we walk into a room, why are we not treated well?
Isn't that exactly the issue we're having with the left. They don't want to talk about the Nazis in Ukraine. They don't want to talk about Genocide Joe being complicit in this genocide. They don't want to talk about minimum wage. They don't want to talk about, they want to talk about, any number of culture war sort of issues. I don't want to have to pick one and exclude others, but you get the point. Let's let it finish out.
When we apply for the salaried positions at six-figure
committee
seat, we have the right to. Why do we get 5% less than the other guys?
Right.
Middle class on the left wants to hear about it. It will dress it up in all sorts of historically powerful language and all that.
Isn't that what's happening, or what has happened, for example, with the Harvard thing? And I'll go back to the clip, because now that we see Vivek and Michael Brooks, let's go back to, did I close that? Oh man, maybe I closed it. Oh, I guess I closed it. I was gonna go back to oh, actually no, it's on X, my bad. We're gonna go back to this clip right here. My bad, everybody. I was thinking this was on live TV, but it's a clip. So now let's let him finish out what he was saying here.
Or in fact, that was the galvanizing force. That was the organizing force. That was the force multiplication in the field, labor unions. And then labor unions were decimated by the ascendancy of the Reaganite right, and membership tanked. And so a giant kind of strike force in politics that did that work is gone. And in that vacuum, center-left parties, including the Democratic Party, became much more and more academia-adjacent parties, right, dominated by debates over terminology. Some of these debates are very, very important. Don't get me wrong.
We're having a bigger debate about the Harvard presidency than we are about middle-class people.
Right. That's the kind, right? It's not about who's right in that Harvard debate. It's just like, why are we even talking about it?
You see how the guy didn't even get it. He's trying to explain it to him. You're not grounded in worker talk, what workers want, what workers are into. And he's saying and proving it is the Harvard thing. The guy's like, yeah, who's right or wrong on Harvard, right? That's what proves. No. Why are we even talking about Harvard? Like, he didn't even get it at first. He had to say, now he said it in a nice way. He's like, well, why are we even talking about that? So let me let him make.
It's not about who's right in that Harvard debate. It's just like, why are we even talking about Harvard? It's the wrong conversation.
Yeah, he doesn't get it. The other
and we're
guy
not talking about making factories safer for people who work there. And so one of the things that the Inc. we're doing.
This is such a good point. And it speaks to why you should not, as a worker, want to vote for this party that clearly just virtue signals about your policy beliefs that you aspire or you want, but they're never going to do. Just because this is the reason I say this is such a good point, because he's saying right now you're in a debate fighting over Harvard. This lady in academia. And he's saying we shouldn't even be talking about that. The average worker's not talking about that. They're talking about their paycheck. They're talking about their bills. They're talking about gas. But you see, back to the Michael Brooks video, academia, middle class, they don't want to hear about that. You know what they're talking about in their circles with their college degrees? They're talking about another college degree, another person with a college degree not getting their just due, aka the Harvard thing.